Welcome to the Ephesiology Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the study of the early Christian movement and its implications for the church today. We are at the tail end of our series, This Political Moment, where we look at the culture around us and seek to navigate it in a Jesus-y way. Today we have Michael, our resident Ephesiologist. I'm Andrew Johnson, a pastor at Neartown Church in Houston, Texas, and we are joined by Caleb Campbell. Now, Caleb Campbell graduated with me, summa cum laude, with a Master of Arts in Ministry from Phoenix Seminary in 2015, and he is currently a doctoral student at Fuller Theological Seminary. He has served on staff at Desert Springs Bible Church in Phoenix, Arizona since 2006, but he's been the lead pastor there since 2015. He also serves on the board of United Pastors of Arizona and as the statewide regional director of the Surge Network, which is really cool to see. He is the founder and director of Disarming Leviathan Ministries, and they have a podcast, explainer videos, training material to equip people to missionally engage American Christian nationalists. Caleb, you have just written the book, Disarming Leviathan, and so we welcome you to the Ephesiology Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be with you.
Okay, so I know you. Almost everyone listening probably doesn't. What are, say, three things outside of our stat sheet that we just rattled off about you that your friends might know about you that you're also okay saying on a podcast?
I am a fan of the Dallas Cowboys. I'm a super nerd when it comes to music, big Rush, Pink Floyd fan. And I really like eating steak with beer in my backyard.
So it's like a trifecta. It's not just the steak. It's not just
all three of those. If I could have all three of those things happening at the same time, we're in utopian level joy.
Okay. Now, when the argument comes up, do you automatically stand with Neil Peart in Best Drummer, or will you have a conversation with Dave Grohl being part of the conversation? How deep are you in all things, Rush?
So when a person asks the best drummer, it's always important to put in scope the category, because to be a good drummer is connected to the type of music that you're doing. And so a good rock drummer may not be a great prog rock drummer, or may not be a Latin fusion drummer. And so it's always about who's the best in category.
This is fair. Way to also almost not answer the question, but I appreciate it. That's well done. Okay. Well, you have written this book, Disarming Leviathan, aiming to equip Christians to minister to their Christian nationalist neighbors. How the heck did this come about? Why did you sit down in that backyard with your barbecue, steak, and beer and say, this is what I want to do?
So in 2015, I stepped into the lead pastor role at Desert Springs, which is the church I met the Lord at in 2001. So I've been here for a long, long time. And I thought I knew what I was getting into. Our church now is, I think, 47 years old, suburban Bible church, predominantly conservative. It's theologically conservative. And by and large, probably 70-80% of the people are politically conservative. But my working assumption was it was kind of a John McCain, there's a statue of Barry Goldwater down the street from where I minister. And so in 2015, I thought, most of these folks are like fans of the blue team, kind of like a fiscal conservatism. But, it never takes the foreground in what we're doing as a church. My forebearer, who served for 30 years, he still continues to be my pastor. He was not advocating for certain political candidates or policies from the pulpit. He was not being culture warry or combative. Our congregation had engaged in things like care for refugees, care for the immigrant community, conversation about racial reconciliation. And by and large, those things were met with, applause. I mean, people liked it. At least that's what it seemed like to me. So 2016 happens, and I was operating under the impression like we're just going to stay the course. I mean, I was kind of
Uh-huh.
surprised by the rise of the MAGA movement, but I remember thinking like, okay, well maybe 20% of the people in the congregation love this stuff, but 80% see this as what it is. It's a power play. It's, political combativeness, culture warring. That's not the way of Jesus, even though they're using a lot of God talk. Certainly the majority of people see it, for what it is. That was what I thought. And I was right on the numbers. I was wrong on the categories. So by the end of 2020,
Oh, wow.
80% of the people who were in the congregation in 2016 had gone. And a lot of that was around issues about immigration, race, politics. Like I did have some people who, because I would not get on stage and advocate for their preferred candidate, they received that as I was secretly working for the other candidate, and
Oh,
couldn't
wow.
suffer it. I was told by people I had shared communion with for over a decade that I was imbibing a Luciferian spirit of fear because we were following government regulations as related to COVID in 2020, uh, accused of CRT when we talked about George Floyd being murdered. I remember in the summer of 2020, we did the same racial reconciliation sermon I had done 5 times before. Part of my background before meeting Jesus, I was a neo-Nazi skinhead, so I'm comfortable talking about race, and it's part of my testimony. And I did the same sermon, and previous years, it was
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, this is wonderful. Thanks be to God. In 2020, it was like, you are doing Marxism. And,
Wow.
these accusations, and again, these weren't strangers to me. And so I was trying to I was so confused, and I was trying to put the pieces together. Like, why is this resistance coming? Why am, personally, it's like, why am I being accused of things that I don't at all agree with? Nor am I trying to like secretly, promote these things. Um, and so 2020 was like so far the worst year of my life. I got COVID in June of 2020 because I'm an early adopter. July got shingles, and then in August, facial paralysis. So it's a thing called Ramsay Hunt, where the nerves on the right side of my face basically gave up.
Mm.
And the first 3 sermons we did after we regathered that fall, my face was paralyzed. So I had to use my fingers to make P and B sounds. And
Wow.
I went to the emergency room, and the doctor was like, "Yeah, you have Ramsay Hunt. Have you been under any stress lately?" And I was like, "Yes, I have." And a lot of it was around, especially in 2020. It was like every other day I was getting a accusation, critical, accusatory text, email, phone call. People were printing out packets from like their favorite newsertainment talking heads, printing out packets of commentary, putting it in a manila envelope, leaving it on my doorstep, knocking and running away.
Mm.
Which in the age of Ring doorbell, it's like, hey Ethel, like, like you can't really do that anymore. Uh, and and so just this massive influx of people leaving the congregation and kind of a lot of them throwing grenades on the way out. And in 2021, went through sabbatical, season of healing, a lot of therapy and counseling. But one of the things is had been regathered and we were kind of, getting back in the swing of things. I was in the lobby and people were handing me flyers, and they were saying things like, Pastor Caleb, there's a revival happening just down the street. There's a revival. And I look at the flyer, and it's like red, white, and blue. And it's got these political pundits on it. There's like an American, like a bald eagle or something flying over an American flag. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at this thing. I'm like, this is a political rally, but that's strange that they use the word revival. And a bunch of people were giving me these flyers, giving it to our elders. And so we were so curious, like, what is going on? So we went just right down the street from where I'm currently sitting. There's a very large congregation that's hosting monthly rallies in partnership with a group called Turning Point USA, which I didn't really know a lot about at the time.
Monthly
Uh,
rallies.
yeah, every month. Yep. Like Freedom Night, things like that. And
Wow. Okay.
so I went along with one of my elders because we were very curious, like, why is so many of our people into this thing? Why are they using revival language? And we went, thinking, oh, this will just be a political rally, No, it was a spiritual experience. They did 3 worship songs that we do at our church. They took an offering. They did a salvation prayer type thing. And then the leader at Turning Point, Charlie Kirk, got on stage and did a sermon. And the way he talked was like, the word of God says, and then he would go on and on about one of his, particular political commitments. Things like the Bible is, the word of God says, Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself, which is why we have to protect our God-given Second Amendment rights to bear arms, because you can't protect and love your neighbor if you can't stop a madman with a gun. Now, whatever a person thinks about Second Amendment, that's fine. But what I'm witnessing is this person on a stage advocating for very acute political positions, but acting like that is the very natural outplaying of the text. And so for me, it was watching a room full of people raise their hands saying amen and hallelujah, having a spiritual experience, in a room where the crosses were all adorned with American flags and AR-15s on the screen.
Oh, gosh.
And that got me curious. And through that season, I decided, I think this is really bad. I need to figure out what's going on. And so I signed up for all the newsletters. I went to dozens of these events. In 2022, I went to their first ever pastors gathering with over 500 pastors, because I wanted to understand what was going on that was so attractive to the people that I was ministering to. And why are they saying that this is a revival? And out of that work came to see that there is a poison in the movement of American Christian nationalism that sells a version of Jesus that kind of sounds like the real McCoy, but underneath it, there's poison. And so that's what got me on the mission, and that's how I came about to write in the book.
How did you, sorry, I had a question I wanted to ask, but this just popped in mind. How did you show up at the pastors' conference and then seeing people who are ministering to congregations, seeing people in the room that you know and love, mm-hmm. and then seeing people that represent congregations throughout the city of Phoenix? How do you approach those sort of folks who are very, very, very different place than you, from that desire to understand and not judge?
Yeah. My first posture was combative. So when I started kind of doing this undercover work and trying to figure it all out, my posture towards the movement and those who were imbibing it was very combative. I wanted to destroy this heresy. I wanted to fight it. I thought if I could just out-Bible these people, then they'll see the way of truth more clearly, repent, and, come back to the fold, so to speak. And I was very angry, primarily because of the relational carnage that I experienced in my own life. I mean, it's part of my healing process. I spent a whole day walking around a park, writing down names of broken relationships as they came to mind. And at the end of the day, I had over 300. And a lot of those were broken over these culture warring, combative, political polarization type issues. So my posture was initially combative. I wanted to destroy this thing, American Christian nationalism. And then I had a meeting with one of the representatives from the organization. And I thought she would be like this embattled, embittered, culture warrior bully. But nothing was further from the truth. And, in the meeting, she walks in effervescent, joy-filled, brings me a Dutch Bros coffee. Between the two of us, she was exponentially more joyful than I was. But a lot of the stuff that was coming out of her mouth, I thought, was just completely off base. Things like, Pastor Caleb, we have to protect what the Bible says about gun rights. And we have to fight for what the Bible says about school choice. We know that the Lord has anointed this particular political candidate, that kind of language. And I was so struck by it, but she was saying these things in earnest. And after about an hour or two of the conversation, she said something that changed my life. She said, Pastor Caleb, politics is really important, but at the end of the day, I just want to follow Jesus. And I remember sensing in that moment from the Spirit, Caleb, you're an idiot. These people do not need an enemy to fight them. They need a missionary to reach them. And I asked her, I said, well, tell me how you met Jesus. And she said, oh, last year at a Turning Point rally. So her entire discipleship has been inside or fed by a version of the gospel that engages in empire worship, syncretism, culture warring, combativeness, but she thinks it's the real deal. And so she's doing this in earnest. And it was in light of that that my heart started to soften towards those who I was engaging with and really thinking about, okay, well, if I was a missionary to this people group, what would I need to do in my own heart? What kind of framework would I need to be thinking about? And moreover, what kind of posture would I take towards those who've given themselves over to this movement? And I found that just by taking on that posture and recognizing that Galatians 6, 1 and 2 says, if anyone is caught up or ensnared in an evil, you who are spiritually mature, seek to restore that person gently. Not destroy them, not conquer them, not defeat them, but restore them gently. And then it says this, watch out for your own self, lest you too be tempted. And I realized that I wasn't watching out for what was going on in my heart. I was casting rage and derision and, thinking myself more highly than I ought to think. And so that text has been so helpful for me to recognize 98% of the work isn't in them, it's in me. And if I'm approaching people wanting them to be like me, then I'm not a missionary, I'm a colonizer. I'm just trying to dominate over them to make them stop doing things that I think are wrong or disgusting, but rather to be like me, read the books I like, act the way I act, sing the songs I sing. And I think that the call of Christ is rather in their own unique way that they would become more and more like Jesus. And that in the process of my engagement with them, that Jesus is actually going to use them to change something in me as well.
Okay. I have a question. So while reading and interacting with some of the things you just said, okay.
Well, let's mention, Andrew, that we've just received your book. I cracked it open this morning, so I'm only 4 chapters into it. So we don't have the full story, but appreciate some of the background that you've contributed here.
Absolutely. So with that, Caleb, the regional rep for Surge, Andrew, the Surge graduate, class of, I think, 2014. So my question is I very much love what Surge is doing to try to get people who are quote unquote not professionals to actually see themselves as everyday disciples, family missionary servants, disciples. This is who we are. Christ has given us these identities, and we live out of those identities, not for approval, but from his grace. And we bring that to the world. However, when we have that missionary mindset and we approach other people and we treat them as the mission field, how do we actually approach others while trying not to have the us and them mentality? But if we use that missionary language, how does that prevent us from acting out of an us and them mentality? We, the missionaries, they, the mission field. How do we go about that doesn't actually go against everything we're trying not to do?
Yeah, I think twofold. One would be asking the question, am I trying to make them more like me or point them to the Jesus that I see? So, Grandma used to say, all ground is equal at the foot of the cross. We're just one beggar trying to tell another beggar where to find bread. Mm-hmm. And so I think the art of humility is key, because I'm not offering anything in and of myself. I'm simply inviting them to go back to or look towards the way of Jesus. I don't think I have anything to offer, but Jesus does. And I'm trying to share that with them. 2, I think the prayer, Lord, what do you want to change in me through them, helps to keep things at a level playing field. If I think they're the one who has all the work to do and I'm all set, then I'm not taking on the posture of humility, but rather dominance or, pride, arrogance, whatever it might be for someone. At the same time, I think Paul does give us categories in Galatians 6 where he says there's people who are caught up. And when you seek to restore them, do so gently. Not because they're an other, but because the current state of being is they're ensnared in something. And so the act of seeking to restore gently is not an othering action. It's just a recognizing this is the state that they're in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know what? I love the missionary language that you're using, and that so appreciate the posture of humility, and so on. Like I mentioned, we just received the book. I'm up to chapter 4 now, and I find myself reading it, and at many places I'm saying, yeah, I can appreciate Caleb's experience, that you got me thinking about the number of broken relationships over the past several years because of the political issues. And that's painful to think about.
Yeah. Thanks. Just kidding.
Yeah. But I mean, that's, I mean, fellowship has been broken with people, and that's just been heartbreaking. But just as heartbreaking is the testimony of the church in general and the country has suffered because of how some of us have aligned ourselves one way or the other on with some political platform, and that becomes our talking points whenever we're interacting with our neighbors and so on. Help me here, Caleb, because in chapter 3, you begin to get very specific, and you use some very strong language in talking about the group that you're engaging. You referred to them, and I don't think I'm putting words in your mouth, but you can clarify this. Referring to their leaders as leaders like those in religious cults. That's not going to win you a lot of friends.
Right.
Yeah. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. My hope is to diagnose the problem and then offer what I think is a Jesus way solution. And so in my diagnosis of the sickness that I see, I am really striving to be acute and defined. I'm not trying to throw shade on people. But I've also been in the room. I mean, I've spent a ton of time with folks, and I'm trying the best that I can to show what's going on inside these spaces, inside this movement, to those who maybe they watch a YouTube video or they see a newsreel and then that's it. And so the diagnosis of the purveyors of American Christian nationalism, I believe by and large are grifters. It's power grab, money grab. And in the way that I see that is in the explicit way that they talk about the win. We have more money. We have more influence. I mean, they're saying this is the thing that we're aiming for. I have watched as purveyors of American Christian nationalism have talked about the movement as a church growth model. We've never had bigger budgets in our churches. We've got parking problems. We've had to add a 5th service. And it is very much about getting big in the metrics of the kingdoms of this world. And I think that's a sickness. And what has been one of the compelling reasons for me to do this is not to throw shade on people, but to do a smelling salt for an American evangelical community that by and large has shrugged its shoulders at this movement. I have run in continually into peers who don't see it as a big deal. They kind of say, yeah, there's a little bit about it that's distasteful, but in reality, it's overall fine. The things they're arguing for are good. I like the ends that they're aiming at, even if I don't like the means. And what I'm trying to argue is these means defame the name of Christ. Jesus did seem to really care about the means. In fact, the temptation in the desert that Jesus experienced was not a temptation of ends, but of means to the end. The ends that he was tempted with in the Gospels in the desert were good ends, that all the kingdoms would bow down to him, that, he could command stone to become bread, that the angels would protect him. These are all good things that God, the Father, has promised us. But the temptation was do it by way of the serpent. It was a means. And the ends justify the means is Machiavelli, not the Messiah. And I think that that's so serious and such a disease that it mars the witness of the church. And I know it firsthand because out here on these mean streets of suburban Phoenix, I have met multiple people who do not fall in line with the red team. And they have said to me, do I need to vote for Trump to go to your church? So the witness that they're getting from the Phoenician church is it's Jesus plus political allegiance. And I think that's a sickness. I think it's marring the evangel. I think it's misrepresenting the kingdom. Even though some of the ends sound like good ends, we want a just and righteous society. I think that's great. But doing so by means of kingdoms of this world form power, I think is extremely dangerous to the witness of the church. So I am using strong language in an attempt to wake us up that this is not just something to shrug our shoulders at, but it really is a sickness. And I hear people say things like, well, sure, there's some things that are just tasteful about the movement, but, eat the meat, spit out the bone. And I don't think that's the right metaphor. I think the metaphor is how much poop in the brownie mix before you throw out the whole batch. How much poison in the food are you willing to suffer before you start over? And syncretism is always subtle. It always slips in, it kind of under the guise of goodness. And so, again, the smelling salt language, I hope, wakes us up to what's actually going on.
Mm-hmm. So I remember Dr. John Delhousse, I think maybe we were in the same class. The definition for heresy is Jesus and. If you have Jesus plus anything, that is the definition of heresy. How do you go about, though, not just the diagnosis, but how do you go about treating the sickness, dealing with the poison? It's not just Christian nationalism, it's Christian nationalists. Right. And so there's an identifier. And so people take this on as personal. And so if you come out and say, hey, I love you, I want you to just be more Jesus-y, but the thing that you are is poison, that seems like that's going to be quite the rejector. Sure. People are running the other way. So how do you, in real time, walk with people so that they understand even the thing that they hold dear, you are still loving them and for their flourishing, but want to call out the thing that's making them sick?
Yep. So it's not through accusatory or prophetic language. So right now, especially in evangelicalism and beyond, I think just the broader church in America, those who are studying and writing about American Christian nationalism are taking, historical, political, psychological views of the thing. I'm taking a missional view of this movement. And the missional lens affords us a strategic answer to that question. How do we engage with people? And I am arguing that we engage with them like we would anyone else, especially if we were missionaries. And that's not table flipping, but table setting. The instinct, I think, for me is flip the tables, right? Yell, scream, condemn the leadership, point it all out. And I think there's time for that. And I think that there's places for that. But Jesus set exponentially more tables than he flipped. And table flipping drives people out. Table setting invites them in. And so my argument in the book is, diagnose the problem, but recognize that people are ensnared in it. And our objective is restore them gently. And so the gentle restoration that I argue for in the book is modeled after what I see Jesus doing throughout the Gospels. He's always inviting people to his table. modeling the kingdom in their presence, honoring who they are as people, even though he obviously disagrees with a lot of stuff they believe. And this, for me, speaks to a deep reality that often gets overlooked. The problem is not in the head, it's in the heart. By and large, people are not logicking themselves to this movement. It's feeling first, the ideology comes second. And the feeling is an anxiety about ethnic erasure. I am afraid that me and mine, or my way of being in the world, is under imminent threat. And so therefore, I will give myself over to a movement that promises to protect me and mine and give me safety, belonging, and purpose. There are a multitude of movements that do this. American Christian nationalism is one of many. But at its root, if you listen to the leadership, they're stirring up anxiety about ethnic erasure. People like you and me, we're under imminent threat from them. Give me your power, your money, your vote, whatever, and I'll protect you from them. And so, like Peter in the Garden of Gethsemane, when we feel anxious about loss of something that's precious to us, we reach not for the cross, but for the sword. And American Christian nationalism is the sword of government power to protect and propagate me and my way of being in the world. And so if the problem is not in the head, but in the heart, then the question is, and Andrew, this is to your question, how do I engage heart to heart with people? And I would encourage listeners to maybe think about their sweet Aunt Betty, who at the 12-year-old's birthday party is yelling and screaming about whatever, lizard people running the government. She read about it on the internet. Someone sent her an article, and she's very upset about it. The problem is not first the idea. The problem is she's yelling and screaming at the 12-year-old's birthday party, which communicates to me something not primarily in the logic space, but in the feeling space. So I might say, Aunt Betty, I've not heard that news. I'm not trying to agree with her about lizard people running the government. I've not heard that. I've not seen that, but this sounds scary. Can we meet tomorrow for coffee? Because I want to hear more. And in that moment, what I've done is I've invited her to a table. I've honored the fact that she's feeling afraid, even though I don't agree with her. If I meet her statement at the kid's birthday party with facts and opinions, we're going nowhere. She'll probably view me as an enemy. Yeah.
Right. It's going even more tense.
Yep, that's right. So just recognizing that the things that come out of people's mouths when they're yelling and screaming generally make sense of something going on in the heart. And I want to communicate heart to heart. So I'm not really in the business of exchanging facts and opinions at the front of the conversation, but rather connecting heart to heart. And so I might do this, invite her out to coffee. So we go out to coffee the next morning. Aunt Betty, can you tell me more about what you were saying yesterday at the 12-year-old's birthday party? Oh yeah, I heard this thing. And, here's this news source here. It's on my phone. And okay, Aunt Betty, tell me what you're feeling when you hear about that news. Again, I'm not trying to agree with her. Oh, I'm so scared. Aunt Betty, what are you scared? Like what's going on when you feel that fear? I'm just so scared for little Johnny and Sally because I want them growing up in a country that, that they're proud of. And I want them to feel safe. And I want them to, that they don't have to be afraid when they go down the street, to the ice cream shop. Right there, I can connect with her heart to heart on values. Those are the same things I want. And so I can say things like, Aunt Betty, I honor you for loving little Johnny and Sally. And I want that same thing.
Yeah. I love that posture. Okay, Caleb, I'm not going to hold back here because I have some concerns here. I love what you're saying, and I agree. That's the humility that Aunt Betty needs to experience from those of us who want to enter into these conversations with Christian nationalists. My question is, what would happen if Aunt Betty learned that you believed that she was a part of a religious cult that had satanic influence?
Sure.
If she were to read that in a book that you wrote, maybe it's called Disarming Leviathan or something like that, what would she think about your motivations?
Oh, yeah, she would think I'm dead wrong and that I've been deceived by the Marxist left agenda. And I say that because it's true.
Yeah.
Meaning I do have people in my life who do know that I've read the book and do feel that.
Yeah. And that's where I'm wrestling, and with the book and with the approach here. And I do that from, thinking missiologically about these things. I was telling Andrew earlier, years ago, my research has been in the area of neo-paganism. And years ago, I was invited to go speak at a very large church in the suburbs of Chicago. And I get to the venue to get ready for this session. And somebody comes up and asks who I was, and I introduce myself. And the person said, "Oh, you're here to give us ammunition about the pagans." Mm-hmm. And I almost fell over when they said that. And I looked at him. I said, "No, I'm not. I'm here to help you understand who they are from their eyes. Mm-hmm. I want you to see them as they see themselves. And for that to create empathy in you, to think about, well, how then do I approach these folks in a gracious, charitable posture, like what you described in your conversation with Aunt Betty?"
Yeah, I imagine, Michael, that anyone who writes runs the risk. Anyone who writes about how to engage Mormons or Jehovah's Witness or our Muslim neighbors and tries to help people understand what's going on probably runs the risk of playing their cards, so to speak. I've certainly felt that. Again, I do a lot of work in the book showing our analysis ought not to lead to arrogance, nor any sort of stratification where I feel like I'm more superiority. Superiority. But at the same time, my concern is that because the syncretism is so rampant under the guise of Christianity, my conviction was I think I need to be as articulate as I can be about diagnosing the problem, because so many people feel like this is real. This is a real McCoy. This is the way of Jesus. This combativeness. This this othering, the toxic polarization that I'm seeing is being called Christian for many of the folks that are inside the movement.
I'm trying to figure out what's the, not because I'm trying to play middleman here. I'm trying to think of what it looks like to be able to healthily diagnose what is a poison, right? I want to use your word because I thought that's both helpful. Also, it's better than saying poop a lot. So I want to diagnose the poison without then simultaneously telling somebody, "Oh, you're a poison eater." It like
oh, sure. Yeah, no.
Putting them in a camp.
Yeah. What I would invite people to do, first of all, the diagnosis. I think Paul's helpful in Galatians when he gives a list of the fruit of the Spirit contrasted to the works of the flesh. What are the markers of the movement, right? If you're with a communion of people and they're marked by greed, lust, divisiveness, or they're marked by love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, that's a good sign of this is the fruit of what spirit. So I think those are helpful ways for us to diagnose. Jesus told us to look at the fruit of the leadership when we were asking or thinking about, is this of the Lord or not? We'll watch the fruit. So I think that's helpful as a diagnosis for any of us in any of the places that we lead and serve. And I certainly, by no means am I advocating that we proclaim onto people that they're drinking poison. The reason that I would use that kind of language is this is not innocuous. Like, this is not a shrug shoulders at harmless thing. I think it really is destructive. So again, that smelling salts language. What I would do with, and what I have done with people that I'm ministering to, is I would invite them to introspection. I'm not trying to proclaim something onto them. And I'm trying, I do this later in the book, in some of the later chapters. I want to invite people to explore the tensions that they feel between the Jesus way and the current way that they're being in the world? Because I feel a tension in those same things. Aunt Betty, in that scenario, we're at the coffee shop, she's saying, I'm scared, I'm afraid for little Johnny and Sally. I want there to have a safe future. I also want those things. And I feel a tension in how do we live the Jesus way and work to provide safety for little Johnny and Sally. I mean, Jesus says things like, welcome the stranger into your home. And I feel a tension when I think about my own kids and actually living that out. And so I want to invite her to think that all I'm really angling for is to reintroduce the Jesus of the Bible to the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So when I feel fear, I reach for worldly power. Now the sword I'm reaching for is like a different one than she's reaching for. And I feel a tension in my own heart. And so I want to invite her to help me navigate my tension and hopefully invite her to be thinking about the tension that she may feel as well. The majority of the people that I've talked to will say things like this. I know we're supposed to love immigrants, but
I'm about to just bury everything I started with.
I feel the same way. I feel fear when I think about living the way of Jesus. I mean, when Jesus says things like turn the other cheek, come on, I don't want to do that. When Jesus says things like, when you have visited the prisoner, you've done so unto me, I don't want to do that. That's scary to me. So I know that I feel a tension in walking the way of Jesus and these deeply held desires that I have. I'm imagining that they do too. And my invitation is, let us be co-explorers together on how Jesus might want to speak to the anxiety or fear or concern that we're feeling. Again, just reintroducing Jesus of the Bible to the conversation, to the topic, because for many of the people that I've encountered, myself included, we think we're all set. We've made sense of things by reaching out like Peter in Gethsemane, reaching out for the sword of worldly power to absolve the tension. And I think that true spiritual maturity comes in, Luther's famous for saying it, a life of repentance, metanoia, right? Having my mind blown and my life readjusted day by day, moment by moment. So if I can take that posture, I think that can be a way to make sure that the playing field is level as I'm engaging people who are believing things that I do think are destructive and harmful.
I'm very appreciative and want to both highlight and put in bold the idea that everybody in every conversation is somebody who needs to be reminded of the fullness and the goodness of Jesus.
Yeah, that's right.
That we are all in need of metanoia, right? There, we have never arrived. We have never fully gotten to the place where we call it good. And then, just like you opened with earlier, you're trying to get everybody to, quote unquote, your side or to be like you. We are on that common ground at the cross.
Yeah, and I appreciate the tension that you're wrestling with here too. It reminds me of Romans 1 and 2. Paul at the end of Romans 1 goes into that long narrative about how decrepit humanity has become. And then in chapter 2, he's continuing the narrative. It's just so disappointing that we break that up as two different chapters.
Right.
But he turns around and says, you, the church in Rome, you're doing
it's
this.
Us too.
Yep.
And I appreciate that tension. That's a hard tension to navigate. But you're giving it a good try.
Yeah, well, this is something that, so we just talked about it, at least according to air dates, as Michael and I have planned. This is on the podcast a few weeks ago. We were talking with Steve Besner about so much of our stuff has been wrapped up with identity. So much of our life, our identity has been rolled into politics, and so much of this conversation, which is what makes it so difficult, is we have wrapped up our identities in these things that we are chasing after, or rather these answers. No, these ideologies that answer for us the questions we're wanting.
Yep.
So Caleb, as a final question to you, so that you know, we're aiming to air this podcast a few days after the election. So there has been an election. There has been a lot of angry chatter between people who were friends and neighbors, but for a season have worn different colors more frequently and have become maybe a bit more angrier. How would you advise those who are listening to our podcast to engage their friends and neighbors in this political moment?
The things that are coming out of our mouths are always connected, or often connected, to things going on in the heart.
I think that's biblical.
And by and large, if we, through hospitality and grace, can steer or cultivate the conversations to places of values, feelings, and needs, we may find that we can connect more deeply with our friend, family, neighbor. Before we start talking about candidates or policies, it may be wise for us to connect first on values. And if we can find a unity in value, especially with our family and close friends, it's likely that you do share a lot of the same values. And then from there, go back up the ladder to conversations about how we think those values shape our political commitments, things we advocate for. Then we're operating as allies, co-journeying together towards a similar end. Namely, we'd like to see those values come to fruition. We just have two different perspectives about how we're going to get there, kind of like two hikers who are looking at a few different trails and say, I think this one's going to get us where we want to go. No, I think this one is going to get us where we want to go. But we're both trying to get to the same place. Sorry, I've got multiple dogs yelling.
Nice. It's all good. Yeah. We can barely hear it.
Oh, great. Okay. So if we're co-journeying together, then our objective is not to beat the other person with an argument or I often hear this kind of language, I owned them. I beat them. I destroyed them. I won the argument, as if it's something that's all combat language.
Yeah.
And instead, if we share the same values and we're co-journeying towards how we collectively as a people can see those values come to fruition, then we're allies helping each other. It affords us the opportunity to approach each other with curiosity instead of suspicion, recognizing that I may have something to learn from their perspective, just as I hope they may learn something from my perspective. And that, I think, is an opportunity for us to keep things at a space of health. If I start with the political commitment before I connect on the value, it really can become more of a combat culture war type thing where I'm just trying to throw facts and opinions in your direction to get you to change your mind about a fact and opinion. But again, those facts and opinions are all deeply connected to values. And so again, I think leading those conversations, cultivating conversations that connect on values, especially for Christians, if we value the way of Jesus, then that is a strong anchor for us to build back up the ladder to conversations about policies and candidates.
This all still falls under I won't say even missiological language, but that difference between a bounded set and a center set.
Yep.
In the center set, in the bounded set, all you care about is who's in and who's out. But the center set, we're all running to the center. How close can we get to being like Jesus? And so with that center set mentality, we're approaching others who are also en route to the center. And we want to say, let's be more and more like Jesus, how we think, feel, and act. And that should be a full of life, pervasive thought. And so it makes us like those fellow hikers who are aiming to that same point.
One of the first things Jesus does in the Gospel of Mark with Simon, Peter, and Andrew is he puts them at a table with a tax collector. Both are following him from two very different socioeconomic and political ideologies and perspectives. And it does seem to me that Jesus is constantly putting misfits at tables together as a means of discipleship. This is the centered set thing, Andrew, that you're talking about. That the process of us together pursuing Jesus from our different, almost polar opposite perspectives is a key portion of becoming more and more like Christ. I think this, by the way, is why like all those one another commands were given, forgive one another, be long suffering with one another, bear one another's burdens, because we don't want to do that because we're opposite of each other. And yet Jesus is putting like Jew and non-Jew, slave and free, male and female, barbarian, Greek, Scythian, putting them all at tables and saying, follow me together. And as we come closer to the center, we might find that God is using them to change something in us.
That's a good word.
Yeah, it's a really great word. I think I am today years old when thinking about the idea that Jesus' commands weren't just commands to future followers of him like myself, but in fact were words that he needed the people who were in that room to hear for themselves to actually follow. When I say love one another, I mean you and I mean you. You know, and he's lovingly giving them the side eye. But I mean, is there a Jesus version of side eye? Anyway.
All is under the redemptive power of Christ. So sure.
Well, Caleb, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you both.
If people want to follow up with you, find you out in the real world or on the interwebs, where would they get at you?
Disarming and that has all of our links to resources, podcast, book, and social media as well.
That is great. Well, thank you again, Caleb. It's fun for me to have you on the podcast and be able to catch up. Listeners, thank you for joining us and spending your time with us as well. This is the end of our This Political Moment series. So if there are other episodes that you haven't caught up on, please jump back. Be a completist, right? Listen to all of them. We invite you to. But if you're still unsure about, what is ephesiology or what all do we offer, go to masterclasses.ephesiology.com. You can see some of the resources that we have for you there, and I'm certain it's going to be a benefit to you. Well, for Michael, Caleb, and myself, thanks for doing theology in community with us today on the Ephesiology Podcast.